On the 1st of April 1969, the crew of Grimsby trawler Ross Puma were aground on the Little Rackwick Shoals, stranded there by the notoriously wild Pentland Firth. In response to their Mayday call, RNLB TGB launched with its crew of volunteers, facing the dangerous storm themselves, bringing the crew to safety in an award-winning rescue. At 2:56 in the morning, TGB launched from the slipway at Brims, the crew of Longhope lifeboat station responding to the Mayday call received from Ross Puma. Visibility was less than 50 yards, with gale force winds, heavy sleet and snow making the Pentland Firth even more dangerous than usual. Dennis Avery recalls the rescue.
Yeah, my role on the Ross Puma was mate. I was mate of the ship, which is the one below the skipper. Obviously the skipper's in total charge, he, for catching the fish and looking after everybody, and the mate's role is to look after the crew, run the deck, hauling and shooting of the trawl, look after the fish and all sorts of things like that. Yeah, we had quite a good trip on board. We'd been fishing west of the Orkney Islands, and we had quite a good trip on board, and we're heading back to Grimsby. So obviously the shortest route back to Grimsby from there is through the Pentland Firth. Normally you've got no problem with going through the Pentland Firth, but unfortunately the ship's radar wasn't working, and the decker navigator, which is the machine that shows you where your position, that was being affected by a snowstorm, which was usual. You probably won't remember, you're far too young, but years ago your radio, when it was getting dark and things like that, it used to start pulsing and you couldn't tune them in, and the decker navigator was the same. So during this snowstorm, the decker navigator was doing all sorts of crazy things, and the skipper saw what he thought was one lighthouse, and unfortunately it wasn't that one, it was another one. So he altered course to pass this one on his starboard hand, which he would have done normally for this one, and obviously it was the wrong one, so we run up on the rocks at Little Rackwick Bay. Yeah, I mean, it was about 2:30 in the morning, and I was due to go and watch at 3. So at the time I was actually fast asleep in my cabin, in the mate's cabin, and all of a sudden you can imagine what sort of calamity noise, and I sort of half jumped out my bunk and half got thrown out my bunk, and it was at that time when I thought I was going to die. I thought, this is it, because you can imagine a ship, the noise it makes breaking up, you can hear it tearing itself apart on the rocks, and it's not pleasant. And then sort of, I don't know whether adrenaline kicks in or whatever is, and I thought, well, now you better start doing something about it. So got all the crew together, got them all up on the boat deck, made sure they all had the life jackets on, and got ready to launch the life raft, which we did. We launched one life raft, and a wave came and washed it away, so that left us with one. So we had to make sure that nothing had happened to that one, because if something had happened to that life raft, we'd never have got off that ship, because the only other way this lifeboat would have got us off was to throw a line across and pull us across one at a time on a rope. So we had to make sure that this life raft, was where it was.
Skipper Dennis Speck,
Yeah.
is he the one that made the Mayday call?
Yeah.
How did he let everyone know that help was on its way?
I think it was just, it's a long time ago, 57 years, I can't remember it word for word. I walked into the bridge and he said, he'd been in touch with the lifeboat, but another thing was, we fired some rockets off, but because we were under the cliffs, the rockets didn't go above the cliffs. So the lifeboat, who was the other side of it, couldn't see where we were. He couldn't actually see us until he got round the headland and saw us there hard and fast.
What was it like being there with your crew on the deck of the ship, waiting for rescue? Do you remember anything about conversations that took place at that time?
I won't say conversation, but trying to make light of it. I mean, I can remember one particular lad saying, "Oh, we're going to sing." So I said, "Look, you can't sing because there's no water under you. You're on the rocks, so you can't possibly sing." But it was more or less trying to keep the morale, saying, "Well, you would be all right," And then obviously when we saw this coming round round the headland, and we knew we were going to be all right then. Lifeboat came in, and he couldn't get too close to us, for obvious reasons. He'd have been on the rocks as well. So what he did, he dropped his anchor, and he paid the cable out, so he came staying as close to us as he could, and then he fired a rocket across with a line on. We pulled the line across to a thicker line, tied it to our life raft, got half the crew in the life raft, and they pulled that half of the crew back to the lifeboat, and we pulled the life raft back again, and the rest of us got in, cut the line that was attached to us, and they pulled the rest of us across and got us aboard the lifeboat. And the first thing they did was give us a big tot of really thick rum, like trees.
Coxswain Daniel Kirkpatrick was already a decorated lifeboatman. He and his crew had been commended for their bravery by the RNLI and other institutions. In 1959, Dan was awarded the Silver Medal for Gallantry for rescuing a crew of 14 from the trawler Strathcoe. Dan received a silver medal and a gift from the James Michael Bower Endowment Fund for the rescue of the crew of Ben Barvis and Aberdeen trawler. Dennis Speck had said, "Dan was at the lifeboat wheel when I was hauled aboard. He looked at me, I looked at him. Words would have been tossed away by the wind, but not feelings. Dan Kirkpatrick knew I was silently thanking God and him for rescuing us from certain death." How did you and the crew know about the crew of TGB?
Well, the only way we knew about them was when they came to see. I mean, lifeboats are strange things. They're sort of incognito till you need them. And then they're there, which is the wonderful thing about them. You know, they're always there to do the job. But I mean, I can't speak for what Dennis and Dan saw. They probably did, you know, you'd probably look at him and go, oh, you know, thanks for that sort of thing. But like I say, the lifeboats is like inconspicuous until such times as you need one. And they got us all down in the cabin, and off we went. I think they call it South Mims, I think they called the village, I'm not sure. And then there was quite a few people on the pierhead to meet us in, and they really looked after us after that. Because as I say, most of the crew on the Puma were sort of asleep in the bunks. Well, once you finish fishing, you don't sleep with all your gear on, you know, so you wouldn't have had much clothing on. And I think, if I remember right, I was probably barefoot, you know, and you can imagine being stood on that boat deck barefoot and it's snowing. And so, but when we got in there, they sort of went round the village and scrounged all sorts of. I had an overcoat and a pair of boots and, you know, things like that. They really, really did look after us.
For the rescue of the crew of Ross Puma, Dan was awarded another silver medal, as well as the Maud Smith Award for the bravest act of life-saving. The news that he would be receiving this medal, which made him the most decorated lifeboatman in the world at the time, was announced on the 17th of March 1969, a day that would forever be remembered for one of the worst tragedies in RNLI history. At 8 p.m, TGB launched from the slipway at Brims, responding to a distress call from the cargo ship SS Irene. The ship had run out of fuel and was drifting without power, with a force 9 gale forcing her to the rocky Caithness shore. TGB, alongside the Kirkwall lifeboat, Grace Patterson Ritchie, faced waves of over 60 feet, with heavy rain and snow rendering visibility near zero. Repeated calls to TGB had gone unanswered, with the acknowledgement of SS Irene's position ashore being the last message acknowledged at 9:28 p.m. At 11:15 p.m, Grace Patterson Ritchie arrived at where TGB had last been spotted by the Pentland Skerries lighthouse keeper. They fired a flare, which remained unanswered. It was determined that it would not be possible to find TGB in the adverse conditions, and so the search was called off until the morning. The 18th of March was London Lifeboat Day. News of the missing lifeboat had spread across the UK. The gale had moderated and a full sea and air search was launched. At 1 p.m, a message came over the air from a search vessel. The lifeboat has been found capsized. There is no sign of life. Pentland, the lifeboat for Thurso and Caithness, towed the upturned vessel to Scrabster Harbour. Unbeknownst to the crew of the Pentland, 7 of the 8 crew members were still strapped to their seats. The body of assistant mechanic James Swanson was not recovered. Coxswain Dan Kirkpatrick and 2 of his sons, Jack and Ray, as well as Robert Johnston and his two sons, Robert and Jimmy, were still inside the vessel, along with the youngest crew member, Eric McFadden, who was 24. The crew had drowned when a freak wave, estimated to be around 100 feet tall, capsized the vessel during the storm. TGB, like most lifeboats active at this time, was not designed to be self-righting. This meant that in the event of capsize, the vessel would remain upturned. Following the tragedy, all lifeboats were to be self-righting. When you found out that the crew of TGB were going to be given a silver medal for the rescue of Ross Puma, how did you react to that? How did everyone feel about finding that out?
Everybody was delighted, really delighted. I mean, let's be honest, they don't dish them out for nothing, do they? So, and being part of it, the reason he got that medal, I could relate at the time what he went through to get it. You know, it was very, very brilliant seamanship, it really was, to put the lifeboat where he did, you know, so that we could get up. As I said to you earlier, if we'd have lost that other life raft, God knows how we'd have got off. We probably wouldn't have got off. So, you know, what he did was like dropping his anchor and backing in and sort of close to the reef. He actually touched the bottom, apparently, you know, on the way in. Oh, it was heartbreaking. You know, when we sort of got to know about it in the local paper and the local news, and obviously because of our disaster, it was on the minds of quite a lot of people in Grimsby. As you can imagine, 15 of a crew, the families would have all been sort of involved in it, and yeah, it was very, very heartbreaking. It really was.
Dennis Speck attended the funeral. Did any other crew members go?
No, I think the reason being, in those days, it would have been a matter of cost, you know, because we weren't making a lot of money in the fishing industry, and it would have cost the crew, you know, quite a lot of money to. So Dennis sort of went up on another Ross boat, took him to the Orkneys, and he represented all of us. Very, very emotional. When I first saw it, I don't know whether my eyes was a bit watery or what it was, but yeah, to see it after all these years, my first impression was really how small it is. You know, you don't realise when you're getting in it, you know, it looks quite large, but seeing it now, it seems quite small. But yeah, my feelings now, and I'm thinking that because of this lifeboat and the crew, my children wouldn't have known me. My grandchildren wouldn't have known me, my great-grandchildren, and not only that, they'd have seen a photo of me and, oh, that's your granddad that got lost on the Ross Puma. You know, so I owe a lot to this lifeboat and the brave men that was in it.
Did what happened to Ross Puma, did that affect the rest of the Ross fleet?
No, not really, no. Unfortunately, good or bad, life goes on with the fishing industry. You know, there were 12 catboats, what they call catboats, originally, and so the Puma went out of the equation and the other 11 just carried on, you know, as if nothing had happened virtually. No. They got a bit more modernised, you know, after 1968, got different radars and different echometers as the electronics sort of progressed, but basically they were exactly the same.
Did your experiences on Ross Puma affect the rest of your career?
Always aware. I think you're always aware of what can happen, because it was sort of early on in my career. So obviously through the years you get a bit of a really bad storm or something like that. It's always there in the back of your mind what could happen. And I think if anything it taught me to be a little bit more careful. You know, when you're approaching land and things like that, I think we learned by the experience. They say every cloud's got a silver lining, don't it? So, you know, you don't realise it until such times as you need them, just what lifeboatmen do. And it's like our fishing industry, you know, when you think that 60% of the population was involved in the fishing industry, we've got to keep the memory going. You know, we don't want people just to look at that bit of fish on a plate and think, oh, that's a nice bit of fish. You know, you want them to think, what it could have cost to put that fish on that plate. I mean, in our case, it could have cost 15 lives. But because of this disaster, that's when they sort of perfected self-righting lifeboats. So although it was a terrible tragedy, some good has come out of it.